Phil Fails. Whoa, Phil Fails. Welcome to Phil Fails. My name is Philip Jones, and today I'm joined by Sara Ness. She's Chief Catalyst at Authentic Revolution, as well as an advisor to social health organizations such as Seek Healing and Rethink Wellbeing. Welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah. You want to wave to everybody? They live in these cameras.
Hi, folks.
Today, Phil fails at authentic relating, which has been something you've been dabbling in, or not dabbling. You've been deep in authentic relating for a long time.
Existing in, swimming in.
And teaching and training folks to teach and kind of leading a business that does that, right?
Yeah.
Authentic Revolution.
Yeah.
Where'd that start?
I used to live in the housing co-ops in Austin. I used to live at Royal Co-op. Maybe some folks know that. And housing co-ops are a weird idea, right? Like you go from living with your parents usually and having almost no responsibility for most of us to living with a bunch of 17 to 20 somethings being given full control over the house, full control over the budget, and needing to like figure out all your dynamics and resolve your conflict. Like no RAs, nothing. So they're a little bit of a clusterfuck, to be honest.
Yeah.
At least kind of culturally speaking. And over time, you do figure out how to interact with other people. You figure out how to make decisions, but it's very kind of learn on the job. And so number one, that just made me fascinated about how people interacted with each other. Like, why did sometimes decisions go really wrong? Why did some house members work better with others, or some groups as a whole work better, even if members of them were not as kind of skilled? And out of the housing co-ops, I ended up taking a trip across the US to visit a whole bunch of other co-ops, communes, co-housing communities to see how they worked. Like, what can you do in college, but also what can you do afterwards to live with other people? And when I was on that journey, I stumbled across my first ecstatic dance. I met someone there that had done authentic relating at this center in Boulder. And I got really interested because I felt like I grew up really isolated. I'm probably a little on the autism spectrum. Like, I never kind of learned the norms of social interaction. So I made lots of mistakes with it. Won friends, lost friends, got kind of mostly kicked out of about 13 different living situations while I was in Austin, just because I couldn't get the social norms. And with authentic relating, they had these games that were like, okay, here are the rules of the social interaction for this period of time.
Now play.
Exactly. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, you can do that? It was amazingly relieving, and it was amazing training. It was the first time someone had gone, these are skills that you can learn. And it was wonderful for me. And I became a little obsessed, and I started helping the guys I'd met in Houston at this ecstatic dance to create community among the ecstatic dancers there and lead these. And then I went back to school in Austin. I'd taken a year off to do this travel, went back for my senior year, started a community out of the housing co-ops there. And people just loved it, and it grew. And that community has been going continuously in Austin for 12 years now, maybe.
Yeah.
And in Houston.
It's interesting you'd mentioned, like, I've attended Authentic Relating here, and one of the most vulnerable things I think I could share with you is that, and I feel more like comfortable sharing it because you told me you got kicked out of all these co-ops. I was actually kicked off of Authentic Revolution.
Oh dear.
Yeah. I was there I don't remember what I feel a little bit of sadness sharing it, but like, yeah, I participated for a couple of months, and I think I'm just a weird dude that kind of was trying my best to be authentic and to, like, participate in the community. I think people were off-put by my, like, the way I showed up. And there was a decision to, like, have me not be a part of that anymore.
Wow.
And it's been a part of my kind of experience as a neurodivergent human being, like not participating in groups or being invited to to not continue.
That's
It's
really
sad.
difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
But it sounds like that was part of your experience too.
Yeah.
So I'm in good company.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
I
Um,
also love ecstatic dance.
oh, awesome. Yeah, it's tough. It's like in those communities being a facilitator. And if this happened in the last couple years, like my organization no longer runs it. It's run by a nonprofit called
Oh,
Connect Humanity.
yeah.
So I kind of didn't know that situation. But it's a difficulty that I've found in being a facilitator and being a community leader. It's like when there's this metaphor of a missing stair that's been really impactful to me, which is like
Yeah.
a guy goes into a bar
Mm-hmm.
and at some point while he's there, he says, I need to go to the bathroom. Where is it? The bartender says, you go around the side of the building, up some stairs. The bathroom's at the top of the stairs. Guy goes around the building. He starts climbing the stairs. Halfway up, his foot goes through a stair. Gets to the bathroom, gets back down, has like a little bit of a limp. And he goes to the bartender and he says, why didn't you tell me there was a missing stair? And the bartender says, well, everybody knows to hop that. And it's kind of a metaphor for having people in community where it's like you can have people who are different than others, but then it becomes in a way a missing stair where the people who have been there know how to interact. And the people who haven't been there are like, how do I navigate with this person? We actually have someone like this in one of our conflict classes right now.
Yeah.
And we've navigated it by just making sure the facilitators play with him because he's an outlier because he's a computer scientist. Like he doesn't quite always get the exercises we're doing. He's not quite as vulnerable. But if you understand that personality type, you're like, well, it totally makes sense. And he has perspectives that nobody else will. In public events, it can be harder because you're like, what is the degree of variance that we can navigate here? And how do
Yeah.
we introduce other people to what that degree of variance will be? I really like having high variance in communities. And I like giving the context of you're going to meet a lot of different sorts of people here. And some of them may not fit the norm that you think people should do here.
Yeah.
So treat it as a learning opportunity for how people interact in the real world and how you're going to navigate. Because if you're learning communication skills, it's useless if you're just using them with people like you.
Yeah. We're talking about communication skills.
Mm-hmm.
So I automatically think about in my life, I don't know, it might be similar to you. I sought out different tools and techniques to help me with relating,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was nonviolent communication, crucial conversations, radical honesty,
Mm-hmm.
neurolinguistic programming, all these types of things
The
that
good stuff.
help you with not only the way you're communicating with yourself, but the way you're communicating with other people.
Mm-hmm.
How does authentic relating fall in with all these other kind of frameworks for healthy and constructive communication?
The interesting thing about authentic relating is it's mostly just practiced through games. I found the word for this the other day of serious games, which are like games that teach you skills that are not just like kind of competitive playable. They're like skill training or working on things like agile games might be an example of
Mm-hmm.
these. And it's less like here's a communication structure and more like we have games for all sorts of different situations.
Mm-hmm.
One of our best games is nonviolent communication. Like I read the book and I was like, this could be a game. So
Yeah.
it's just a game where one person talks, the other reflects, first person clarifies, adds, reiterates, and then the other person says, this is what I think I understand about you based on your share.
Yeah.
There are games like Watermelon, which is a silly perception training game where one person just says watermelon and the other says you seem and names like the way that someone is showing up.
Mm-hmm.
There's curiosity games where you get to ask questions for a certain period of time and then say how you're impacted. So each of them, you could say, trains different skills. And it's fun because you can create different flows of these. You can be like, okay, I want to help people experience, for instance, their relationship to themselves and different parts of themselves. So I'm going to start by giving some prompts for people to talk with each other about what are different parts of yourself that you would name, what are parts that are in conflict. Then I'm going to do like some sort of meditation where people get in contact with like their inner crew of different selves.
An IFS type of thing.
Yeah, and then an IFS game that we call split brain, where you identify two parts of self that are in conflict and you actually assign them to two different people, and then you act as the director while those people dialogue about this
Sounds like
decision.
Gestalt.
Yeah, in a way. And so we're gamifying all of these different psychological techniques
Yeah.
and practices and going, how can we string these together to give people a really deep experiential experience that is specific to the person? Like, less like we want you to get an outcome and more like, what are you going to discover from this?
Yeah.
And then through the process of sharing our discoveries with each other, you get this rounded experience of everyone sees this differently. How do we play it out together?
Yeah, I love the like you're pulling from everything. Like I hear that Gestalt or even radical honesty where you have the empty chair, where you have two different people that are really just yourself kind of communicating. You have the MVC, you have all these different things pulled into a game format.
Yeah.
Which really reminds me of improv.
Yeah.
I've been facilitating improv for many, many years and then ended up teaching facilitators to facilitate it. And that's a very experiential teaching environment.
Yeah. I was just listening to Impro on the way over here by Keith Johnstone. It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah. Johnstone's one of the founders of some powerful stuff. And that's a place where I think if you do it right, I love Viola Spolin. If you're doing it right, the games do all of the teaching.
Yeah.
And you just kind of pick a flow of games to kind of move things along. And I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of skill training on a daily basis. I have classes in facilitation. I have classes in how to have difficult conversations, in community building. But one of my absolute favorite events that we do, and we do this on a weekly basis for free, and we've run it for like 3 years like that, and many more years intermittently before, is called Fight Lab. And we just get folks in a room together on Zoom because we've got a pretty international audience. There are like 40 to 60 authentic relating and circling communities worldwide at this point. It's pretty broad. So we get people on Zoom and we're just like, okay, what are scenarios you're struggling with? And we trade off weeks between leadership scenarios and one-on-one scenarios. And we vote on the ones that have the most appeal in the group. Like most people are like, yes, I have trouble with that. Like last week we worked on one around boundaries that someone brought. They were having a conflict with a neighbor. And then the week before that, it was someone that had been leading an LGBTQ event on touch and consent. And they had some trans folks speak up about not feeling like their experience was represented enough. So really interesting scenarios. And we set it up and we do a role play. And first we encourage that the person who brought the scenario that's struggling actually plays the antagonist. They play the person they're struggling with to really get in their head.
Strong man their argument, right.
And also to show everybody else how that person interacts. So in future versions, they can represent it accurately. But you can also be a witness. You can try being yourself first round. And after the role play, we stop it and we go, okay, what happened? How did you feel as the antagonist? Like what worked for you about what the facilitator protagonist did? What didn't work? Where did you contract? Where did you like feel like something and you relaxed? Then we get reflections from the rest of the group. I'll do like maybe a tiny bit of like, if they're struggling, like here's a skill that you can try. But for the most part, it's peer coaching. It's experience. It's like a little bit of exposure therapy.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
And much as I want to believe that my techniques are the coolest thing, a lot of the time for people just getting to try something and getting feedback and getting to hear from their peers is actually the most valuable thing.
Yeah, there's something about when someone gives advice or gives strategies, I always appreciate it. But it doesn't mean I can do it. And there's something about stumbling until I find it. And it's always going to be a little different than what they suggested, but they can point the way.
Yeah.
But it'll never stand in for just kind of faking it till you make it.
Yeah.
Like just getting out there and being messy.
Something I like saying is that teaching is general and learning is specific.
Yeah.
So you really have to give enough time for people to try things. There's a technique that I really love from the rationalist organization, CFAR, the Center for Applied Rationality. They do a bunch of programs on how do you confront cognitive bias. And they have this tool called Murphy Jitsu. Murphy's Law is anything that can go wrong will go
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah,
So if you teach people a new technique or they make a decision about something, you go, okay, we're going to Murphy Jitsu this.
yeah.
It's a month from now. How surprised would you be if you don't follow through on this decision or you didn't integrate this technique? And if you're like, I wouldn't actually be that surprised. Some part of me knows I'm not really going to do this. Then you go back and you revise it.
Because you're not all in.
No. And that's the thing about it is like people, they like the idea of things. I'll say people, but also me.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I love this technique. I love this piece of advice. I'm definitely going to implement it. And then I find myself not doing it because the hypothetical and the reality are really different. Even people's assessment of how much time something will take, studies show that we're wildly inaccurate.
Yeah. Yeah. Being a software engineer and estimating is a big thing. When people estimate how long it'll take to do things.
Do you know the idea of Socratic ducking in software?
What's
Okay.
this?
So this is another version of like we secretly know things that like our cognitive mind doesn't, but like we actually know how long something's going to take or what the issue is. There used to be something in software engineering where a software engineer would finish a piece of code or whatever it was. And then a day or two later, they see their manager walking towards them with a crestfallen look. And all of a sudden, and even before the manager comes, they're like, I know what went wrong.
Oh, yeah, this is the rubber duck.
Exactly.
The rubber duck, you would go, I've heard of that.
Uh-huh.
That's where you like go to your colleague and tell him what you're having trouble with. And by the time you're done telling them what you're having trouble with, you know the answer, and then you
Right.
go back and fix it. And then the people said, well, why don't you just talk to a rubber duck?
Uh-huh. Yeah. So
Yeah.
in the organization I got it from, they called it Socratic ducking because you
Yeah.
would just like ask questions of the duck and
Yeah.
answer your own questions.
And then you like, it just comes to you. That's cool. Okay, 5 questions about authentic relating.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm going to be, which is not.
That's like that was the 0 question though. I realized that could be the first question, but
Oh, I'm sorry. You only have 5,
I've
so.
got 4 left. Dang. Okay. How does someone fail at authentic relating?
Oh, goodness. One of the ways is, and it's weird to say fail because like, I think everything is authentic to the person, right? So I'm going to go with the standard definition of like what authentic relating usually looks like, which is like being a little bit more vulnerable and honest with ourselves and others.
Okay.
So one way that people can block that a bit, twofold. Number one, constantly talking about things they already know. One of the most effective ways of appearing genuine to others and actually being genuine with yourself and having a new experience is to allow yourself to discover in the moment what is true for you. So if you're always reporting on something you already know, you're more talking for the benefit of the other person than of yourself. And the other person may not even care. They're like, okay, you've probably told this story 5 times. I want to discover with you what's true right now. So that's one. And the other one can be like, sometimes somebody is making a ton of jokes. And jokes are completely welcome in that space. Like I make them all the time. But if you're very habitually making jokes because you're kind of uncomfortable slowing down enough to find what is true right now, it can block things. And it can also be difficult for a group because it takes the group's attention. Everyone wants to laugh at a joke.
Yeah.
And if you have someone that's doing that a lot, there's not always room for other experiences. I find jokes really fun when you've had a certain buildup in the room or you've had a certain amount of connection and then someone makes a joke and we're like all in it together.
Right.
So that's kind of a different type of joke than one person that's habitually like trying to like be the class clown in a way, which is usually like, hey, I don't know what it looks like to slow down. It doesn't feel safe. This is my role that I usually play. And it doesn't always work to just have that person to like judge that person for sure and be like, hey, can you stop making jokes? Because you can't tell someone to stop doing what they're doing
You're
without
taking away their
giving them.
whoopee.
Right,
You can't take
exactly.
away their whoopee.
Yeah. And it never works to tell someone to stop doing something.
Right.
Like, stop asking so many questions. Well, what am I supposed to do instead? Stop over talking. I don't even know that I'm over talking. Like, why is this a thing?
You're asking them to stop being themselves.
Exactly.
Or stop doing what you've been doing.
Yeah. So you can say something like, hey, I'd really love to like hear a little more about what you're passionate about. Or I'd love to hear your answer to this question. Like, I'm loving the humor, and can you like tell me it with a straight face or something?
Yeah. Yes, and. Yeah, I like that. Two things I heard there were, the first thing I like think of is like, be on an adventure together, as opposed to be kind of going through old stuff that's, a story you've told many times. Explore together with the other person. Be kind of inventing it. Like, I thought Lewis and Clark, be Lewis and Clark, not, one adventurer recounting his own adventure. Y'all adventure together about something.
Yeah.
Is that kind of it?
Yeah, totally. Adventure
part?
together, even if you're just talking about yourself, like, allow yourself to discover a new way of telling the story. Like, for instance, a fun game to play with networking is have people go and introduce themselves to each other and like talk about what they do. Right? So you give them a couple minutes each to do that. Then you have them go to someone else and you're like, okay, talk about what you do, but you can't use any of the words you used the first time.
Nice. Yeah.
And it forces people out of their box. They have to think about it differently. And oftentimes they'll find themselves being way more creative. Like, maybe the first time they talked about the facts, but the second time they tell a story about what they do, or a moment with it, or whatever.
Or maybe get silly, or find some way to, I love that. Invite creativity into something that's could be rote.
Yeah.
Could be like well traveled. And the second,
no, go ahead.
I was just going to reflect back the two things that I heard you say. And the other one was like jokesters. Like, something about, it's not always jokey. It can be fun and playful, but joking around can be some distraction or some hiding.
Yeah.
Where there might be something more authentic that could be shared, or something deeper that could be revealed in the absence of that constant joke.
And I'll even build on that a little more. I think it's more even than just jokes. It's like habitual patterns. Some people ask questions very reflexively. They're really uncomfortable having the attention on them, or it's like they've learned it as a mechanism of being liked, or it's uncomfortable to have space in the conversation. And so they'll ask question after question. One way to notice if someone is doing this habitually is sometimes their questions are disconnected from each other. They like need to have a next question, so they'll say it even if it's not really curious. And that's another form of like habitual relating. And you really have to slow down enough to get out of those habitual forms.
So like redirecting the spotlight. Like, if someone is asking a question immediately instead of really sharing what's true for them around something.
We're taking enough time to pause and go, what am I curious? If someone's like, what do you do for work? And you answer it and they're like, cool. Like, what do you think about the city you live in? And then you answer it and then they're like,
there's no,
do you have any kids?
Right.
Yeah.
There's no logical train of thought where one question leads to some other exploration that's tied. Non sequitur questions, a bunch of them.
Yeah.
It's like, can we slow down and say, like, it seems like you're reading from a list of questions that you've got to ask before we get done. Yeah, that makes sense. Those are two good ways to fail, I can imagine. What do you think? Well, let's do the opposite. What do you think successful authentic relating is? Like, what are some of the attributes of a successful authentic relating connection?
Well, one of them like are the opposites of those. So allowing yourself to discover in the moment what's true for you. Even if it means having pauses in conversation, even if it means saying, let me think about that for a second. It's better to slow down than to assume that you're going to have an answer right away, or tell the same story again and again. Like right now, I don't necessarily know what I'm going to say before it comes out of my mouth, which on one hand is vulnerable because I'm like, wow, I could just completely lose my train of thought.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it feels like I'm being here with you in response to your questions and in response to like even the affect you're giving to me. Like with someone else that I'm talking to on a podcast or something, I'm going to interact differently. And
Yeah.
with you, it's really easeful, which I'm appreciating. um, so that's one of them. Is just like slowing down and
Can't do
taking the
opposites
time.
of the Phails though, Sarah.
Shoot. Okay.
Well, you can. You can do
Gosh, now I've got to
anything.
think of something
Oh
else.
my goodness. You get no time.
Uh-huh.
What do you think? Not opposites of the. I love that
Non-opposites of
though.
it. Yeah.
Like, what do you think are other things?
How do you succeed at authentic relating?
Be
Allowing
authentic.
yourself to be paradoxical is another one that I really like. And it's hard to describe this one. Sometimes people seem almost apologetic for changing their mind or having different perspectives or having parts of them in conflict. They're like, I know I should have an answer to this, but, or like, I'm sorry, this is confusing. Things like that, where it's like, no, there's not one authenticity. There's multiple parts of ourself that at any I kind of subscribe to the internal family systems view, where it's like, freedom versus safety is a big one that comes up, where it's like when people are looking to change jobs, which I know you're thinking of, there's the one part that's like, wow, I want something dependable. I want to be able to take care of my family. I want to know what's happening on a day-to-day basis. There's a grounding in that. And then the other part is like, but I also want to feel passionate about what I do. I want to feel expressed. I want to feel like I'm giving something to the world.
Yeah.
Right? And then maybe you have another part that's like purpose driven. Like I want to give something that's really meaningful. And another part that's fun driven. It's like, I just want to really enjoy what I do.
Yeah.
And we get very bound up because we're like, I should just have one narrative and make one decision. Our culture doesn't have a lot of space for not knowing, for exploration, for making mistakes, for changing your mind. But people who assume they should be cohesive seem very in conflict with themselves. And you can kind of feel that bound upness.
Yeah.
And people that are willing to just be like, here are the different parts of me speaking. I don't quite have an answer yet. I'm going to live into it. And share that with others and be willing to. I find that brings a form of authenticity and relatedness that then others really open up as a response. They're like, oh yeah, I have that too.
Yeah, I'm torn too at times. Yeah.
Yeah,
Pulled in
exactly.
4 quarters.
Here are all the different pieces of me that are struggling right now. So it's like, and that kind of ties into another piece, which is like just vulnerability of things that are going on with you, things you're scared of, things you're proud of, things you're experiencing right now, things you'd like to experience. That causes others to open up. When I'm training facilitators, I'm like, in any game, you should be the first to be vulnerable.
Yep.
Because the group will go to the depth that you go. You should always do a demonstration of a game. You should always do it ideally from something that's like true in the moment for you then.
Yep.
Or if you've come up with it ahead of time, it should be something that like really feels true for you, even if you haven't figured it out yet, especially if you haven't figured it out yet.
Let them see the messiness of that.
Right. And it should be adapted to the group you're working with. If you're working with a company, use a professional example,
right,
whatever it is, but like, let yourself set that standard even if you're in the front of the room.
I love that. And I use that in the improv facilitation when I go in there, when I participate or demonstrate, I make sure I'm huge so that it sets this bar way high so that anybody can, express below that. They can come up to me, they can go past me, but I'm at least creating a huge room, a huge area for everybody to make silly sounds or make silly noises or gestures or movements, because we got this kind of gregarious, wild Tasmanian devil that like says, okay, well, if that's the normal of the facilitator, then that leaves a lot of opportunity for me to be anything that I want.
It's another reason why as a facilitator or a teacher or whatever, it can be valuable to demonstrate different ways of doing something, where you can be like, okay, I'm going to demonstrate. Like for instance, if we're doing a vulnerability focused exercise, generally speaking, we want to give people a couple different options. We want to be like, okay, if you want to do the spicy version of this, you could like talk about your childhood trauma.
Yeah.
And you might even give like a little example of that. If you want to do the intermediate version of this, say it's a curiosity game is an example I'm giving. Like you could ask questions about like, what is a traumatic experience you had in childhood? What's your relationship to sexuality? How did your parents fail you? If you're doing an intermediate version, you could be like, what are you passionate about? What is your home life like? What is something that you've always wanted to do and haven't gotten a chance?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do a mild version of it, you might be like, what is it that you do for a living? Um,
Yeah.
where do you live and how do you feel about it? So that I'm giving examples in that. So it's not quite like the vulnerability of demonstration, but I'm giving people enough ideas that they can play at their own level and they
Yeah.
can bounce off of it. Because if you give both like this is what it looks like as fully expressed, which is great in
And
improv.
you all have to do it.
Exactly, but you
Yeah,
can
it's like,
also be like, okay, like, but this is the version of it where like I'm also expressing,
yeah,
but I'm doing it in like a way that feels true to me. So
true
like
to me.
find your
Yep.
whenever we teach trainings, we always have multiple leads. And I oftentimes choose leads that I have a hard time with or whose styles are really different than mine because I want people to have multiple examples. When
Yeah.
I got my training, um, I mostly got it from individuals, or like there was usually a hierarchy where one person had a very strong personality. And I, especially when I initially got trained in circling, I really, really struggled because the style I saw was not my style. I couldn't emulate it, and I didn't do the practice for months and months afterwards because I felt so ashamed at not being able to replicate that.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want that to happen for my students.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I thought of was you can be expressive with low volume. Like there's oftentimes people think intensity is volume,
Yeah.
but you can be really expressive and really intense at a low volume. You can also be really, the opposite of that is true. Although it's probably a little bit harder. I tried to think, how would I do that?
Not expressive at high
Be
volume.
really high volume but small in what you're doing. I guess it could be really bland, but
I mean,
there's
even by.
this giving this level
Mm-hmm.
of what you share and how. And then I love this like different versions of it because people aren't going to resonate with every style. So
Yeah.
you want a bunch of options for people to pick from.
I think the main thing as a teacher is trying your best not to make people feel wrong about the way they are
Yep.
and finding the value in the thing they do. I think oftentimes art teachers, when they're good, have the
Yeah.
the kind of most characteristic experience of that is like the way somebody draws, start from that. Figure out how to turn that into something really special instead of teaching one way to draw. It's the same with learning and facilitation is like if you can bring out people's superpowers or name what they're doing that's valuable, even have them teach it to others, they all of a sudden feel like they can turn that into something really beautiful.
You love what is, even if there's aspects of it that could benefit from feedback.
Yeah. And there are some things where it's like, okay, what you're doing is like maybe you should use some correction with it or like let me at least reflect the impact that it
That's the
has on
feedback,
me.
but you can find something positive in it to
Exactly.
start, because to influence, you have to connect.
Yeah.
First, there's got to be some engagement or some like trust
Yeah,
that
you
comes
have to
through I
appreciate
see
what is.
you, and then there's some opportunities.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Like if I have really soft spoken facilitators, I'm like, that can be a superpower. People have to lean in when you speak if you
Yeah.
really own it instead of apologizing for it,
Yeah.
which I guess is another piece of like doing authentic relating, right? Is like try not to apologize for who you are.
Yeah.
There's going to be somebody that gets along with it. It's the facilitator's job to find a way of accepting it and normalizing it for the group, ideally, or finding a way of talking to you one on one and saying, hey, you can choose your behavior, but here's the impact it's having on other people, which we don't usually get told. We just get told you should change that.
Yeah, we want to know the impact. Or the impact is I believe that most things with regard to personal growth, personal development, begin with awareness,
Mm-hmm.
an increase in awareness, whether it's looking in or looking out. And so having that level of what's the impact of this? And oftentimes just the impact alone, if provided in a safe way, or not safe is kind of charged word in this area in a,
Consensual way, maybe. It's
yeah,
like,
and where they're not out to get you, the
yeah.
person's not giving it for their own agenda or they're not trying to hurt. The changing can occur much
Hmm.
like if you touch a stove, like the feedback is immediate, it's hot. The hot stove isn't out to get you, and you're
Right.
going to just not touch that stove again.
Yeah.
So getting that feedback immediate, getting that impact of your actions can be really, it can be informative.
Yeah, my husband makes a distinction I really love. He sometimes does feedback trainings for companies, and he does makes a distinction between appreciation, evaluation, and coaching, that they're three different things.
Appreciation, evaluation, and coaching.
Yeah, it's really nice, like, when we give feedback to our co-facilitators, I oftentimes try to, like, distinguish those three things. Like, here's
Okay.
what I loved about what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Evaluation is like basically like, here's how I felt about it, here's how it landed, here's the effect I saw on the rest of the people here. Um,
That's evaluative.
yeah, it's like that's evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then coaching is like, here's something you could try.
Try some
Here's what
things.
I would have preferred. Here's an idea, whatever it is. We usually like mix up evaluation and coaching or skip evaluation entirely. We're just like, here's what I loved. Here's what I think you should do.
It's the hamburger.
Mm-hmm.
It's the love coaching, love
Love
sandwich.
coaching.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, the reason that I think you should change this is that I saw a bunch of people in the room crossing their arms and looking away when you were explaining all of the instructions for the game before playing them.
That's all about having a lot of detail and having a lot of specificity in the feedback that you're giving, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
I observe this. I get back to this MVC thing. I don't know why I'm on a Marshall Rosenberg thing today, but
Because NVC is amazing.
I love,
It's like
I
one of
love
the
Marshall
best
Rosenberg.
tools. Yeah.
I found one, I'll digress for a moment. We have one MVC teacher in all of Texas, lives in Brenham, and I've been talking to her about coming and doing the show, and I'm trying to find 12 people or maybe 15 people that she could do a workshop with so that when she comes she has a little bit more incentive to come.
Oh,
But
that's fun.
I posted on Facebook and no one responded, and I felt like,
Huh.
does no one love MVC anymore? Like, what's up?
I know some local groups who do it. I'm trying to remember the name of the
Well, there used to be
organizers.
David and
Yeah, David and
she
Ellen or
moved
something.
back. She moved back to Europe. I don't
Oh,
think she's here anymore. And I don't know if David's doing it anymore. But I digressed, and now I forgot where I was. But oh yeah,
evaluation. Yeah.
specificity when you're doing these types of things. You can say observation without judgment. I noticed when you said this, the people in the audience did this, and I think that detail can really empower the feedback. It can empower the coaching because they're like, well, you have eyes that saw things that I didn't see,
Yeah.
and it's a lot better than good job, dude, or whatever,
Yeah.
or I liked what you did there. And it's like, well, what exactly did you like? There's nothing I can take away from that kind of dull feedback.
Yeah. And I will say that I personally am really prone to coaching without evaluations. This is a skill that I'm constantly
You do it.
Oh yeah, I can be really bad about it,
Hmm.
especially when I like feel a little bit contracted and I'm like, oh no, like, this facilitator did something wrong and they like harmed the class. It's like very rare that there's actually harm done. And
Yeah.
even if there is, it's like you're not always going to change people, like you said at the beginning, by giving them advice. Like they have to oftentimes come up with their own solutions. And people usually care if you give them impact. If you're like, hey, when you said that, I felt really hurt. I felt betrayed. I
Mm-hmm.
felt like my heart sunk a little bit.
Yeah.
They care about that way more than if you say, hey, you shouldn't say things like that.
Yeah. They're like, well, dude, I don't want people to feel that way. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want that type of impact on the people that I share space with. So oftentimes that's the coaching.
Yeah.
Just, well, you can give a couple strategies. I imagine they can be helpful too, but they're probably going to be sitting in that for
Yeah.
a minute of like, I've had a bunch of failures, me personally, and sometimes the failures can be deafening,
Yeah.
just sitting in the impact of them. But that in that deafness, in that failure is the learning, the lesson, the tool, the
Yeah.
gift.
I think the best way to approach it is like as a scientist as well, which
Hmm.
is like if you get feedback, if you can like, teach yourself to treat it as data instead of a commentary on you,
Yeah.
and be like, well,
Yeah.
what specifically did I do that caused that moment? Hey, are there other people that felt the same way? Are there other people that felt differently? Like,
Yeah.
especially for facilitators, we get lots and lots of mirrors, and we have to be able to check it instead of getting devastated at every piece of feedback.
Right. They all can't strum the chord of our self-limiting beliefs.
Right. And so you have to start, even when you get appreciation, start asking, well, like, what
Is that
specifically did you
valid? Yeah,
appreciate?
yeah.
You
Or
know?
is it just that I'm the one standing up here teaching the class?
Right. What should
Or
I do more of? What should I do less of?
yeah.
Do other people feel that same way? Is this just my way of being or my superpower? Am I not great at it, but I can find someone else who is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Third question, we got to think of a third question real quick.
Okay.
The first two were
First two were good.
I ask everybody those two questions.
Okay.
It's the last three that I try to make up. I improv them. Questions about authentic relating. Let's see.
Or anything you're curious about.
What am I curious about? I mean, ideally what I'll do is I'll like take these and practice them.
Okay.
Like this is the beginning of a relationship with someone. It's the opportunity for that. And the vision is that after this, kind of learning this skill from you, getting these 5 questions and talking about this practice,
Mm-hmm.
learning about your life and what got you there, the next step would be, if there is kind of a if it's cool with everybody, I'll practice it and then come back and have follow-up conversations where I'll say like, I practiced some of these
I
things
love that.
and then this is how it worked or didn't work, and then it's an invitation into some kind of relating
Mm-hmm.
um, with the philosopher that manifested into this philosophy book club.
Mm-hmm.
This philosopher brought over 9 books and he was like, okay, here's how I think we should do it. And I was like, okay. Now I'm like reading philosophy every other week,
That's fun.
which has been
That's a
challenging.
great thing to leave somebody with.
I mean, it's awesome. So let's see. How can I learn? What do I want to know about authentic relating or authenticity and
It's hard because,
vulnerability?
like, you do a bunch of these skills already. I can already tell in the way that you're navigating it, like, even you not having the questions prepared, but instead being like, okay, what am I curious about from the person? The way you make eye contact, the way you lean forward, you have like a kind of ease of movement that's usually common in people that are actually relating in the moment. There's kind of like a stiffness of posture
Hmm?
when someone's being kind of self-conscious.
Hmm.
Also, you started us out by being like, even before the interview, by being willing to talk a little bit instead of being like, okay, we have to start the interview at this time. You were like, it's okay to chat. It's okay to like shoot the shit,
Yeah, I
answer some
want people to be
questions with each other.
comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a form of relating and being kind of in yourself and in the connection with someone
Yeah.
else. Because authentic relating is like both authenticity, like me expressing, and relatedness, receiving the other person and being willing to kind of be in the beingness together.
Sarah, I have in my life done a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Uh engaged with a lot of frameworks and modalities in order to do what I thought was fix me.
Mm.
In order to figure out how to do better at making friends and being a part of communities. So I've engaged with a lot of different types of, practices. Authentic relating has been one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I learned in the end was, I didn't need to fix me. I'm not sure which one taught me that, but just the idea that I needed to fix myself or change in any sort of way. Not that all these weren't wonderful, but that's probably why I have a grocery list of these types of things and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of shared vocabulary
Yeah.
and little practices that I use that I learn from each one, you know?
Yeah. It's like you try to triangulate yourself through all the different modalities, and at some point you're like, I can go to any of these points, but there's a me in the center of all of them.
And I'm okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to be weird. It's okay to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it not work out all the time. It's
Yeah.
okay to be different. Um, did you have Well, what brought you to these types of things? You said you got the boot from some co-ops and having maybe some level of autism, and I know autism has a social dynamic to it. What
Mhm.
had you interested in these types of things?
I think, um so like I said, I grew up quite isolated. I really didn't have many friends growing up. Looking back, I don't know if I'd say I had anybody that was a true friend. Like I didn't have anyone I could talk to about what was actually going on in my life, until high school for sure. And even then I was like friends with all the outcasts at a school of outcasts.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was a lot of social skills that I didn't really learn. But when I got to college, I was kind of like an arrow loosed from a bow. Like I grew up quite isolated. My parents didn't have any friends or even acquaintances either. They worked most of the time. They were both researchers and doctors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I and I went to an all girls private school for middle school and high school, like 30-person graduating class. So it was about as like isolated as you get.
You've
Lived
said
in the
isolated
suburbs.
now 3 times. I
Yeah,
have to ask about what that is. What do you mean by
like
isolated?
like I just didn't have many people in my
Was
life.
it out in the middle of the country
I lived
or?
in the suburbs. We didn't know anyone else on our street. My parents didn't have friends. I barely had friends. I taught myself to read when I was about 4 years old, and then I taught myself to speed read, which I thought was normal reading. So I used to read on average about 10 fantasy books a week.
Oh, wow.
My whole world existed inside of books. It's still kind of my main addiction. Like if I start reading a fantasy book, I cannot put it down until I'm done. And usually until I'm done with the series. I won't work. I won't interact with my husband. I won't hang out with friends. Like I have to ration myself
Yeah.
because it's my safety place.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't like locked in a cage or anything, but I definitely didn't learn social skills.
Was that a wonderful place to be, though?
Oh,
Well,
I loved it.
we're kind of like overlapping with the second part, which is going to be this deep dive into your past, which is fine.
Yeah.
You're giving me a little bit of insight into what that's gonna look like.
Yeah. I did. It felt like, I think if I hadn't had that, I would have been um, quite depressed. But instead, I had all these wonderful worlds to live in. And I just didn't have that much contact with reality because reality, like, I didn't understand how people were supposed to work. Um, yeah. And
How that's such a funny thing
yeah.
to hear that sentence. How people are supposed to work.
Yeah, how they're supposed to, like, what are the social norms? How do you talk to people? Whenever I talk to
Mm,
people, especially new people, I just felt extremely uncomfortable and awkward and
yeah,
bound up in myself, which I think is really normal for
probably
that
normal.
age.
Yeah, for
I would make a lot of faux pas. I wouldn't notice social signals that people thought they were giving off. I couldn't understand anything that wasn't explicitly stated.
yeah. You want explicitity,
Yeah.
explicitity,
Explicitness?
explicitness.
I kind of like explosivity. That's really good.
I think that's a
I
neologism.
know, I love those. Um, but when I got to college, it was like I got all this socialization I'd never had before.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that I was like this very bright and engaging person, which I'd never realized before. Like people were really attracted to me. I had tons of energy. I was out doing things all the time. Um, but it's like people would know me for a while and then they would get, I think, kind of off put, unless I was in a leadership position, which has its own shine to it.
Yeah.
But I kind of had a hard time really keeping friends. And like I said, I kind of lost a bunch of houses and housemates because I just wouldn't, they would be trying to tell me things and I wouldn't pick up on them. Like I wouldn't pick up on any of the subtle signals.
Yeah, you needed it to be bluntly said.
Oh, yeah. And even then, I would kind of like sometimes try to get around it or not hear it. I just didn't really get where the boundaries were
Yeah,
um, of listening to other people's experience.
sounds familiar.
Yeah, you have a lot of the same. Yeah. And if you're in a leadership position, people like look up to you and they think it's normal. But if you're just relating with people on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think that's why I got interested in what I'm into now. Um, and it's funny, in the last couple years, I got some really tough feedback from a couple people. I kind of had what I'd say was a bit of betrayal from like two of the people closest to me.
In the
That
last couple of years, you say?
Yeah, like a couple years ago, I got told by one collaborator that she felt like I was hurting people and
Hmm.
was like being really insensitive and like uh, ended up just having a huge schism in my home. It was a housemate that I was living with. And then one of my closest collaborators told me she thought I was an evil cult leader. So I had like this feedback and I was like, well, if two of the people closest to me think this, then like
There must
I
be
must be
something
doing
to it.
something
Yeah.
wrong. I should step out of my leadership positions. In retrospect, like the feedback I was getting from everyone else is like, this isn't true. If you look at the guidelines of a cult, you're not leading one at all. Like the event you held that this person thought you hurt people at, everyone opted into. One of the staff members had gotten COVID the day before and everyone was exposed to it.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
had chosen to not cancel the training, but to give
Yeah.
everyone there an option to come or not. We held the
Yeah.
whole thing outside, but she like felt like it was still very unsafe. So like
Mm.
I was like, if I can't see what I'm doing in leadership, if I'm hurting people, I should step out of it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's been really strange because I've noticed that without my role, I'm a different person. Like I have to build up from scratch. Who do I want to be? That was a very strong part of myself. And that's been a little bit disorienting. It's been like, okay, I feel like I'm in a new phase of my life where I have to figure out who I am now and who I am without this very seductive mask that I put on, where I was high status and people wanted to be with me because of it. But now I have to figure out who wants to be with me because of me.
It's interesting. It's interesting for me currently because there's this idea that this is some avenue into adding value into the world in a larger way,
Mm-hmm.
which I think directly relates to some sort of status.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to be a valuable person in the community, in society.
Yeah.
And I think this is a way to like give back in that way. And then when you start to step into that, if it starts to have some success, it's like you're stepping into a new version of yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not that, I mean, you're multidimensional,
Right.
but that's part of the dimensions. I mean, you still have your fantasy novel self.
Yeah.
You don't relinquish that.
Something I've really found is like from trying to step away from everything, I think what I'm finding is that we actually don't exist outside of roles and we don't exist outside of relationship, really. Like, I can't step out of all of my roles. I have to find things that I'm going to inhabit and ways of being that I care about.
Well, if you could go further than that, we could discuss Buddhism. We're not going to, but we get to where there's no self at all.
Exactly. Which is like, if you're independent of anything else, like, that actually feels true to me.
Yeah.
Strangely.
You are me and I am you and all that stuff. What
Mm-hmm.
is that? I'm the walrus.
Yeah. What are the selves that you feel you want to inhabit? Like, what do you want to step into?
For me,
Yeah.
when I think of the person that I'm every day kind of more and more stepping into, is it falls under mind, body, and spirit type of realms. Just living an active life where fitness is a big part of it and optimal health is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then um, engaging, learning, lifelong learning new things all the time, and then sharing those with people, interesting things I'm excited about or interested in a way that's not just enriching my life, but enriching other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
Being ADHD and probably other coexisting conditions, I've gone down numerous rabbit holes and they've been to myself, right? I've gone deep dived into a ton of things. When I was circling a bunch, I think I went way down the integral rabbit hole, and it lived and died within me. And I want to find a way to share these rabbit holes
Mm-hmm.
because it's really fun. Some way that ADHD can be a benefit to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then also there's a part of it that's seeking companionship and realizing that providing value in the world is a beacon of sorts to folks that not only share your values, but are walking their own path. There's this saying, you find your purpose and then you find your partner. And there's this way I'm still looking to find that purpose-driven life. Well, that's what I'm finding right now. I'm living that purpose-driven life.
That's a pretty cool thing to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now it is. Finding that mission and purpose. The thing I was going to say, but decided not to, but now I've decided to say, now I just need to find out how it can be financially stable.
I was thinking when you were talking about the idea of ikigai. Have you heard of this?
Yeah. The Japanese ikigai is, what is it?
It's like, what's at the intersection of what you love to do, what you're good at, what people need, and what's going to make you money, which is like, realistically speaking, almost impossible to find.
It's hard.
Most of us have a day job.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Some people hit that nail on the head, but it is the question. It's like, if you're living your purpose, how do you make ends meet? And especially because you have a family, so that puts more strain on it. But I really love that you're going for what you do care about, and especially that you said, like, you don't know what's next and you're leaving some open space, because I think that's where that uncertainty is, where something new comes in. I find myself kind of craving it in my own life. Like, how do I take a step back and really start considering like what I want to be and do at this phase of my life? I think one of the things I'm finding is just like, I want to be really excellent at whatever I do. In the last couple of years, I feel like I've gone through all these different iterations of like, am I going to teach conflict? Okay, I've done tons of research on conflict, but like, I've never like worked in a jail. I haven't done formal mediation for years. I've gotten trained in it, but I haven't like practiced beyond a couple of sessions. Like, okay, I'm not living it to the extent that I feel like I can be really excellent at it.
You got your mediation certification?
Yeah.
Dude, I've been wanting to do that.
I love the place spirits. I got it.
Because it's only like a 40-hour thing. You can do it in like a week, can't you?
You could if you taken live training. Yeah, I think. I did it with International Mediation Campus. Okay. I've got to say they were really great. But it was, we woke up at 6 a.m. Like twice a week for 4 months to do that certification. Wow. They do have American time zone ones that just wasn't at the point we wanted to take it. Right. So like, but they were really, really good.
I've wanted to do that, and I've researched it more than a couple times and watched videos, and I'm like, man, that'd be cool. I actually went through a mediation recently, and I might have the mediator on the show, because I'm like, there's something that's really exciting to me about supporting people at that junction in their life. It's a crucial conversation. Very much. Emotions can be high, stakes can be high, and you're kind of reading the room and active listening, reflection, finding people's values and sewing that all together, or helping people sew it together for themselves, but giving them the little nudges. It just seems really cool.
It's fascinating work. Yeah, the couple that we did, I just found really, really interesting and complex. And one of the questions for us was like, also, how much are you a teacher versus how much are you a facilitator, especially if you're also a communication teacher? Like, when do you come in and you're like, hey, you guys are contributing to this conflict in these ways, versus when do you just hold open space? And to be honest, like, teaching myself not to teach in those spaces of like, I am here to solve a problem.
Right.
I am not here to change people's way of communicating.
It's solution-based. Yeah.
That was really, in a way, it was both very restraining and also very powerful. Because in communication, we don't usually think of it as solving a problem. We think of it as like...
effortless efforting.
Yeah. I'm going to improve your life skills. And mediation is like, no, we got to decide who gets what in the divorce.
Yeah. At the end of this, we leave with a court, with a document. Right. Goodness. All right. It's 50 minutes, so we're going to just jump to fifth question. I know we've asked a ton of questions. We'll just call those 4 in there somewhere. 5 question is, what do you think? What do you think a good question would be for yourself? What are you excited about? Oh, that face is... I'll think of it. Let's see. Why do you do this is always a good one. If that feels good to you, I could think of another one. Let's see.
Give me like 2 to choose from.
I'll give you 2 to choose from. Why do you do this is a good one. And then,
Actually, let's do this. You want to play a little game real quick?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so there's a game we play called Curiosity Tapas,
Mm-hmm.
which is where if you don't really know what the other person is going to be most interested in, or you want to like let your mind a little bit free on curiosity,
Uh-huh.
you ask questions, and instead of answering, the other person just gives a 1 to 5
Yes, I've played this game
of
on
how
how
interested they'd
exciting
be.
the question is.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's do
exactly.
it. Okay, so why do you do this?
3.
What do you think is next? Like, where do you want to go next with all this?
Ooh, 4.
What are you bad at?
4. Just for ease of answering.
Yeah, let's see. What daily practices would help someone get real with authentic relating? Like if there was some rituals they could invite into their life, what would they be? A couple of them.
Ooh, 4.5.
Let's do that one.
Okay.
What kind of rituals do you think would be?
Also, I love how much more creative you got just then with like getting to slow down and think of questions instead of like pressuring yourself to have one.
Yeah.
It was really cool to see that shift.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's this if I don't have a question immediately, I'm seen as I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or that sort of thing. The benefit of me calling the show Phil Fails is I'm not inviting people to see something that's polished and put together and is a successful show.
Yeah.
I'm inviting them to see me fail.
Uh-huh.
And to fumble and to figure it out.
It's so much permission, right?
Let them just witness this whole thing, the fool's journey in every episode, which really gives me a lot of like grace. Which I want us all to have.
Like called yourself out ahead of time.
Yeah. It's a fool's journey, you guys. Like,
yeah.
Witness.
So let's see. The question was, how would I recommend that people practice this, right?
Yeah, rituals that you think they could invite into their daily life that could, if I've got my morning routine, you could do some journaling, or what would be your authentic relating kind of daily routine that would maybe start to, start to like reinforce or build up a practice.
I have a couple ideas of what I do, so I'll just share those.
Yeah.
One of them is I really love having buddies that I like do a check-in with, like ideally every day. So I and my husband are poly. We have a really wonderful girlfriend. Every day, or at least once a week, we have a group thread together, and each of us will do a little check-in. And we've kind of defined together what we like best. So ours is sensation we're feeling, a story we have, appreciation, and my husband added one that's like an impossible story that you have. So what's something impossible you can like get yourself to believe right now, just as a creativity exercise. So like the idea that like everybody, so my impossible one right now might be like everybody has a secret purpose. And it's like a very clear thing. It's like you should do this thing, like you should teach people finance, for instance. Like that is your purpose in life. And when you find it, it's going to be like transformative
you ignite,
for you. Yeah. But it's something really weird and so specific that very few people find it. Like you got to hit that nail exactly on the head. And if you do, boom. But
you
it's
just
like,
happen to be in an office going through to meet somebody else, and you see a finance piece of paper, and you're like, what?
It is my role in life.
I just got a little aroused.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Why am I aroused right now?
my thing in life is to create kinky videos about finance documents.
Oh my God.
Ding!
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my impossible story for today. That. So that's one thing. It's
a
just
check-in,
like,
a daily check-in with people in your life.
Yeah. Ideally something like maybe in the morning, even if you're messaging somebody else, but something to like get you a little bit into the norm of sharing with somebody.
It's twofold. Number one, you're like, what am I feeling? Like you're checking in with yourself before you're sharing that check-in. So it allows you it gives you this point where you define point where you're saying, I'm going to check in with myself. And then what you just shared was, I'm going to share that out.
Yeah. And I do that with myself too. Like even before I get out of bed in the mornings, if I remember, I do like 3 appreciations and 1, what is my intention for today? And for a while, I was really struggling with self-confidence. So I made myself do the appreciations as what appreciations do I think other people have for me?
Oh, I
And I
like
made
that.
myself name 3 of them. And then I do what's my intention for today.
I think people, yeah, what do I think people appreciate about me? That's interesting.
It was really It really helped with self-confidence because I realized that my internal stories were really negative. I was kind
Mm,
of implicitly assuming that other people were
don't like me.
disliking things
Yeah.
about me. And instead, I was like, no, I bet you that my friend is really grateful to me that I texted her yesterday to ask how she was doing. And I bet she like thinks that I'm a good friend.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, this is like challenging something
Well,
I
you're
didn't even
automatic.
believe
Yeah,
I
you're battling your self-defeating, self-limiting beliefs in there. You're battling
right.
all your shadows.
It's really cool if you can get yourself to like do the opposite of what your brain is implicitly thinking.
Yeah.
Existential kink is a version of this,
I
but
love existential kink.
something I did for a while is like when I was feeling really self-conscious and nervous around other people, I made myself look at them and just say friend inside my head.
Mm.
And it like I got so much more comfortable with people. I was like, what is my brain actually
Everybody's my
saying about
friend.
them? I think my brain was like unsafe, unsafe,
Unsafe.
unsafe,
Yes.
unsafe
Yes. That's what your brain was saying,
was my
probably.
default. And when I made it say friend, it was like, oh, friend.
In Buddhism, I'm bringing up Buddhism again, probably
No,
just
that's
because I
great.
just talked to a Dharma teacher before you and
Uh-huh.
also have been in it. But in Buddhism, they've got this thing where because of reincarnation, like everybody in the world has been your mom at some point in the
Wow.
infinite.
That makes your mom jokes more awkward.
So, but they teach you to like see everyone you're communicating with as your mother.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this automatic familiarity, loving kindness type of vibe. So it
Yeah.
seems like this trick, I'll call it a trick, but just this like, yeah, a trick
Reminder.
to like make people less threatening, make people more loving. You're essentially, they say God created the world as in his image, but
Mm-hmm.
we are God. We create the world in our image.
Mm-hmm.
And once you realize, I mean, I'm saying absolutes, but once you realize that you create the world, then make it a friendly world.
Yeah.
Sure, shit might happen. Things might go bad and someone might do something that's wrong. They might wrong you, but don't let that be what you look for every day.
Yeah.
Create
Which is,
friends. And that's what you were doing.
yeah. And it requires a conscious effort to do and a constant effort.
Yeah.
The other one I'll say, and we're kind of going through a whole bunch of cool ones here, but the other one I'll say is like, it's around the idea of withholds. And a
Mm,
withhold is something that you are like holding back that's eventually creating a barrier between you and someone else. Sometimes these are really big things. Like I have a withhold from this is not true right now, but I have a withhold for my dad about like not making his will or something or not talking about his cancer. Or I have a withhold for a housemate about feeling like we might need to part ways or like, we've had a really difficult interaction. So
some
sometimes
kind
they're
of
big.
thought that's been happening in the back
Right.
of your head or that's coming up and you're not sharing it.
Yeah. But sometimes they're also really, really small. It's like I have a withhold from my housemate about the fact that she slammed the door and gave me what I thought was a dirty look when I walked in the other day, and I'm feeling really uncomfortable around her.
Yeah.
Um, I have a withhold for my husband around like him checking his phone when we're talking and the fact that like I feel a little disconnected when he does.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you notice withholds usually when you're starting to avoid the person or avoid some aspect of their behavior
Yeah.
or feeling subtly resentful. Those are like the triggers for I probably have a withhold. And I bet if everyone listening thought about it, they would notice a couple little
You
withholds
probably
they
got
have.
withholds with people in your life.
And usually you don't even know what's the moment it came from. Like you have to really practice to be like, let me track back and ask myself when this started. And you really have to remind yourself you should not have a solution. This is not about having the answer
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
It's not about, the roommate one was actually a bad example because I was like, I have a withhold about wanting my roommate to leave. Well, actually the withhold is probably something like I have a withhold about like my roommate inviting people over and blasting loud music late at night, and how destabilizing that is to me, and the fact that I've spoken to it a bunch of times and now I'm starting to think about whether we're a fit for each other.
Right.
Like, that's more specific. Kind of like the appreciation evaluation
The
coaching thing we talked
specificity,
about.
yeah.
If you have those, learning to actually speak up about them and practice that muscle is probably the most important authentic relating skill you can do on a regular basis. And you can do it in a couple ways. One is you can set a specific time where you do it. So with a housemate, I used to have every week, we get together, we have dinner, we do appreciations and withholds. Start with appreciations. So you like, kind of feel like
It's
you're
the
more
hamburger.
open. Right. And then end with one too.
Connect before you influence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let's get the good feelings, and then you got the crunchy peanut butter.
Be more open. Today I was I was presenting a plan to a couple collaborators, and before I did it, I asked, would you lead with appreciations and curiosity after I present this before you give me feedback? It's really helpful. If you're in a work context, you can build it into your one-on-ones. You can build it into your group meetings.
Yeah.
Like at the end of it, you can be like, hey, do you have anything for me that would help our working relationship? Or if you want to use that languaging, you could say, do you have any withholds for me? In one company I worked with, they used to call this go direct. So do you have any go directs for me?
Yeah.
So don't wait for performance reviews, because if you find out about it then, it's like not, what are you going to do about it at that point? It's too broad.
Well, you're inviting intimacy.
You're inviting intimacy, yeah.
People don't realize that. They think I don't always realize that. Mm-hmm. That saying those withholds are invitations into your experience and connection, and they can be difficult. It's then like what happens next is kind of really important.
So, couple skill points in this. One, always ask for consent.
Yeah.
Ask, is
I
this...
gotta share something that's a little
might
spicy.
Be a little bit difficult. Is this a good time?
Is this a good time?
So not just, are you open to it?
Did you have a flat tire this morning and you're feeling sick? And
some people need more preparation time than others.
Yeah.
Some people want to hear it in the moment.
Some people want to hear it in writing first, and then let's talk about it.
Exactly. My husband hates having things sprung on him. He wants to I'm like, cool, would you have time to sit down tonight? I think it's going to take about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Give him a time frame. Actually get consent. Just don't get kind of passing yes, no consent.
Yes.
That is shitty consent
yeah.
to me. Give options. So that's one thing. Another thing is, ideally share what happened, share the impact on you, and then let the other person respond. Before you give a, here's what I'd like, ideally be like, hey, when you slammed the door the other day and gave me a dirty look, what I presumed was a dirty look, I felt really uncomfortable. And I'm curious, are you mad at me for something?
Yeah.
For instance, I'm following up with a question. I'm curious how that moment felt to you. What's your experience of this? So get shared reality on reality first, and then you can brainstorm with the other person. You could be like, okay, how do we navigate this in future? What's an experiment we could try? So instead of saying, how do we solve this? Be like, what's something we can try? What's something we can fail at?
Yeah.
And see how it works ongoingly. So that is just amazing. It's so transformative to relationships. It's we have a glass between us and it just gets smudged and smeared over time. And this is Windex for your relationships.
Yeah, that's a perfect one. That's a really good one. All three of them are really good. And I remembered 1 and 3, so I'm going to invite you to remind me of the second one. The first one you shared was check-in with somebody. Mm-hmm. And the check-in can be preferably every day, and have maybe a couple people that you do this with regularly. And that could be what's up with you emotionally? What's something you're excited about? What I noticed through a lot of these was affirmations, gratitude practices. We have a negativity bias. Mm-hmm. When I say we, the human experience is negativity bias is there. So we really don't need to talk about the worst things that happen to us, but balancing that out with gratitude and appreciation, I think, is really important. Yeah. And I've noticed that throughout.
It can be what are you struggling with, and also what's something you're appreciating.
What's going well, yeah. So having a check-in and having some fun and playfulness to it, that whole secret purpose thing. Mm-hmm. And then the third one was withholds, and the second one was...
We kind of got into the idea of reframing your thought about other people, and having a different story.
Everybody's a friend.
Yeah, I wouldn't even have named, but it actually is something I've found super, super valuable.
Yeah, it's reframing people
Mm-hmm.
as friends.
Yeah.
Like this being aware of your orientation to strangers, your orientation to people in your life, or you automatically endowing them with they're on your team. I can
Yeah.
even think like, man, they've got a Phails t-shirt. I can just walk up and see, oh man, they've got my t-shirt on. Like
Yeah.
we're on the same team.
My husband, because I am prone to like getting angry quite quickly and getting quite defensive.
You
So
are?
he and I, oh God, yes. If I'm triggered, like I go straight to defensiveness and judgment.
Oh
And
wow.
it's something that I've really struggled with.
Yeah.
And my husband, when he notices it, has started just saying, same team, Ness.
Yeah.
And it relaxes something in me because it makes me aware that in that moment I've been thinking more on different teams.
Yep. I say that to my kiddos. We're on the same team. I'm on
Yeah.
your team.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's important. A question that I had, and we're gonna scoot to the middle thing. So
Okay.
this is just one. Oh, should I ask this? Yeah, whatever. How do you see like so authentic relating and circling? What's their relationship? Did they come? They kind of came up around the same time, and even I don't even know now. Jordan's calling it relatefulness. So
How
it's
much of a
like,
history lesson do you want
oh
here?
my
Do you
god.
want the 2-minute version or the 10-minute version?
Well, I mean, how much time are
5-minute
you? Do you
version.
have a hard stop?
Uh, I will need to check my phone to find out, but I don't think so. I actually
Okay.
tried to move my next thing a little bit.
So I don't mind a 10-minute response, but I definitely want to learn your life story and kind of your childhood. You've already kind
Okay.
of teased it a little bit, so I'm excited to get that. And I think that's a big part of this
Mm-hmm.
expression is hearing people's childhood and all that stuff.
Well, I'll
So I
try to be
wouldn't want
short
to.
about that part. And this is fun because just like a lot of people wonder about it.
Yeah.
So like, let's see. I want to say that this is like going to be as accurate as I can make it, but it's still going to be according to me.
Okay.
So like,
Circling and authentic relating according to Sara
according to
Ness.
Sara Ness. Okay. So cast your mind back to the world of, I think it was the late 90s. There is this guy named Guy Sangstock.
That's right. He was at Burning Man.
He was at Burning Man. The whole story is that he took 10 hits of acid and he started seeing what had to be true for people to be the way they are. Guy's an artist. So something he told me is that he almost gets like a visual readout of like the different parts of people and like their core self. So he's really good at naming that aspect of themselves. Guy is also a little bit of a savant. Like he's brilliant at this and he also can be like kind of whiffy about everything else, but he's like, it like literally is his zone of genius.
Yeah.
So he was part of a community in San Francisco that I think was just called The Community. And he started leading these workshops in this thing that got known as circling. There's actually kind of a funny story of like he was putting on a breathwork workshop and they got to the breathwork workshop and they were like, what are we going to teach? We don't have anything prepared. And then someone was like, why don't you do that thing you did at Burning Man? And he's like, okay, let's try that.
Oh my God.
Back then, circling was really different. Like they would circle someone for 8 hours until they cracked. Like they were almost more like encounter groups.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So almost everyone in his community went through this experience, which I think they called either Alethea or Arate at the time. Might have been Arate. And then somewhere along that line, this guy named Decker, Kunov came onto the scene.
Yeah.
And Decker had been leading this community called Soul to Soul, also in San Francisco, which was just a community of people that were relating in this deep way. Like they would go to parties and people would be like, what are you guys on? And they were like, this is just the way we're relating with each other. Also kind of a natural expression of how Decker does, how he is in the world. And he was, no, I think that's a little bit later. So he attended one of Guy's events and pretty soon ended up being like a course leader and a coordinator for it. Then there's a point where Guy is going downhill. Decker is doing this sort of work with pickup artists and doing it for dating salons, translating it to the real world. He was a much better marketer than Guy. Guy kind of ran through the community that was available in San Francisco, and then he was going downhill, and he either gave or lent the rights to circling to Decker, which became very contentious later on. There was like a huge schism in the community between the two of them because of the like, you know, Decker went away and made it successful. Guy came back on the scene a couple years later. Did Guy have any right to it? Like, so that got really complicated. A lot of drama in a relational
Surprise,
practice.
surprise, human beings,
It's
drama.
one reason why I actually got so interested in teaching conflict, because I discovered that authentic relating and circling are really bad tools for it. They don't specifically speak to that. You need a different tool set. They're good for some degree of regulation, but not for dysregulation. So
yeah, I learned crucial conversations.
crucial
Well, it's
conversations.
basically MVC for business.
I know. It's so good, though.
MVC is like rebranded. I think crucial conversation is MVC for business. This is according to Philip. And then how to speak so kids listen and listen so kids speak is MVC for parenting.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back to the story.
So back to the story. So anyways, Decker, so Guy kind of drops out of the picture. Decker teams up with, he goes and a guy from Boulder comes to one of his trainings for pickup artistry and men
This is
and
where
such.
we get the Integral Center.
So yes, so he goes back. He's the director of the Integral Institute, Robert McNaughton. And he's like, this stuff is amazing. It's basically an intersubjective integral practice. And he and Decker convinced Jeff Salzman, who owns the Integral Center, which is an old converted church really close to downtown Boulder, to lease them the building for a reduced rate. And they start leading trainings out of there. And around now, like 2012 is when I stumble across it. And I find someone that's been through the Authentic Man program, which is one of kind of the pickup artist communities, which, by the way, in terms of marketing, was absolutely brilliant. They marketed to pickup artists by teaching them inner game instead of outer game. So basically how to get women through presence and integrity and curiosity.
Being a better
and all
man.
this.
I found a lot of the pickup stuff, which is really, is just be a better human being. And then people are going to like better human beings.
Which it wasn't back then. Back then it was very technique focused and negging and how, this was the early days of
where
pickup.
they were using like MVC, like the hypno.
Yeah. Like
the manipulation
kind of
stuff.
Hypnotizing people, negging people. Different techniques that you'd use to get women into bed. But at some point, men were like, wow, this is unfulfilling. Like I can get somebody to sleep with, but I can't find a girlfriend.
Right.
So they would go to like Decker's programs and such, and he would kind of transform the brilliant programs. Like one of the exercises they did, I eventually ended up being on the women's teams. They'd like work these guys for the first 2 days. On the third day, they'd bring in women like dressed to the nine. It's like we were going on a first date. Absolutely gorgeous. We had like a guy that was kind of coordinating us, who was literally just there to appreciate us and like make us feel like goddesses. And like we would come in and we would just give these men reflections on their way of being. There was this one exercise called the approach. All it was is a man would walk up to 2 women sitting on a couch, stop, not say anything, and we would just give felt sense reflections on how we felt in his presence.
What's his vibe like?
Yeah, like, and sometimes we'd be like, I feel repulsed, I feel drawn in, I feel whatever it is. And then he'd go back, he'd get coached by the men, he'd approach again. So like really kind of very actually like authentic relating-ish, like core of how do we feel around each other?
Dial
what is curiosity?
Vibe,
So I met these guys that had been through that program. They had gotten this little manual of authentic relating games that Decker and Co. had produced from some of the work they were doing with dating salons. I started leading those games. This kind of does go into my personal story. I started leading those games with these guys, John and Brian, in Houston, and then I brought them back to Austin. At that time, there were like 3 to 4 authentic relating communities in the world. There was mine and Houston's, I guess. So I was helping lead both. There was New York and there was Toronto. And then to some extent there was Boulder. Boulder occasionally led games back then. So I started, since there were so few games in Austin, we were inventing new ones all the time. And I knew some of the other leaders were inventing as well. So I started collecting a more extensive games manual, which now is more than 250 games and variations from like, I think over 100 people all over the world. So that's kind of how I made my name, was like, I created resources for this whole like burgeoning set of communities. And like, you could say really kind of catalyzed that movement of authentic relating as well as circling. Authentic relating, some people would call it like micro versions of circle. Some people would call circling an authentic relating game, and some people would call authentic relating a form of circling. Back then, they were like kind of sister practices. And oftentimes when you did circling, you would start by doing some authentic relating games to train. But you could also lead authentic relating games nights on their own. But both of them were kind of meeting at the Integral Center. That's where all of the leaders were coming from. So back then, we honestly didn't make a lot of distinction. Like, it just didn't matter as much. I liked authentic relating games because they're more modular and you can be a lot more like creative with them. Circling is a specific practice. It's super deep. Oftentimes people would go from authentic relating to like, we want to take the reins off, we're going to do circling. But authentic relating in some ways can be a better place to start because you're going to get the skills, you're going to build up the tools, you're going to try different things. And it was better for different scenarios. Like it can be hard to go into a company and be like, okay, we're going to circle. But it's easier to go in and be like, okay, we're going to do like a series of authentic relating games to learn communication
I could
skills
see
or
that.
feedback or whatever. And then
Yeah.
you can work up to circling because that's like, let's just be in presence together and curiosity and receptiveness and awareness.
Yeah.
So now it's a couple years in that I've been connecting with the Integral Center, and these guys, John and Sean, who are in Europe,
Circling Europe. Yeah.
are starting to do something that kind of feels similar. I went into them at the Integral Center.
Did they meet anybody? Oh, were they here in America?
They
Did they start it on their own in Europe?
They were in Europe. They
Okay.
started on their own. They were teaching tennis.
Did they have any exposure to what was going on in America?
No, I think they were into integral theory. They were teaching tennis, and the way they were coaching their students was similar to what circling was in some ways. So they somehow find out about the Integral Center. They end up there. I meet them there. They contact me a month or two later. They're like, we want to do a tour in Austin doing whatever our form of circling is.
Yeah.
I'm like, cool. I'll organize something for you as like the first place you're going.
Was Jordan involved at this point?
So here's what happens, and this is funny. Jordan, he and I were circling together in Austin. He ran an integral group, which is how I'd met him at the time.
He's a huge Ken Wilber fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
He wrote the book, like that book.
Yeah, exactly. So like I start going to his integral meetups because someone in Boulder tells me about him. He starts going to authentic relating games.
Okay.
Just phenomenal human being. Like
Oh,
we
love
kind of
Jordan.
fell in friend love instantly.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
lived together for a while. We led together a lot. So there's this immersion coming up and I'm like, Jordan, I think you should be there. And he's like, I'm not paying $350 to be at an immersion. I already like do a bunch of this stuff. I was like, Jordan, build the website for it and I will give you a free ticket. I think you need to be here. He goes, he meets John and Sean. They instantly connect. It's great. 2 weeks later, they message us and they're like, hey, we're overbooked in Toronto. Will you guys fly down and help with it? So that was kind of our kickoff. Jordan and I start leading immersions together in this little bit more of circling Europe style.
Mm-hmm.
We do a training in Austin. He ends up being very in bed with them. I end up being like, I like bringing a lot of different things together. And back then circling Europe was very much like you either do it this way or you don't do it. And I was like, I want to combine.
Was this
a bunch
before
of
the
styles.
circling studio in Austin?
Way before the circling studio. This is
So
like,
he was working with John and Sean before that even started?
oh yeah, well before.
Was this when y'all were doing it
This
at
was
Costa
like-
Luz?
This was like maybe 2016, 2017 or something. This is
Okay.
like early on.
Okay.
He was working with John and Sean for several years. Circling Studio is only maybe 2 years old.
Okay.
He was doing regular circling before then at Casa de Luz, and then I think at his
At
house.
his house, yeah.
But yeah, this is before Relatefulness, everything like that. So lots of other stuff happens, but that's kind of where the different branches happen. Guy comes back on the scene. That causes a schism with Decker. That gets really dramatic, whatever. Decker steps out of the scene. He kind of gets run out of Boulder on a rail because of a couple things. Integral circling kind of dies with him. The Integral Center also Jeff Salzman ends up selling it. So that practice isn't around as much anymore. Although out of the Integral Center closing comes Authentic Relating International, who also does authentic relating trainings. They kind of become the other big authentic relating organization. They do way more trainings than us now. And they also do way more specific, like authentic relating skills trainings. We focus more on facilitation and conflict these days. Some basic authentic relating for sure, but like kind of specialized. And so they've been going a couple years, doing a fantastic job. And now you've got like these two main circling branches, Guy out of San Francisco doing Circling Institute, and John and Sean out of Europe, and Jordan doing Relatefulness out of Austin, which comes about because there's a point where all of a sudden we find out that Circling Institute is trying to trademark the word circling.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
And then Jordan said for a long time they would be grandfathered in.
It got extremely contentious. It honestly, Circling Institute, I have feelings
That's
about the
Guy
way they dealt with it.
Sandstock's one in San Francisco?
Yeah,
Right.
basically they stopped. We, like, 5 of us filed trademark injunctions on the same day because we only found out about it a couple days before it was supposed to go through. They'd done it on the down low. Somebody leaked it. They said, okay, we're going to have a big meeting of everyone doing circling. So there's like 30 of us on the call. I'm running a circling platform at the time, even though I'm not actively teaching it.
Authentic Revolution is doing circling?
We ran a
Or there was
platform
another
called
one?
we ran a platform called Connect, where there was circling every day.
Okay.
Which actually, beautifully, after Connect closed, there's an offshoot that's continued doing that same morning circle every single morning for years
That's
now.
cool.
It's
Yeah.
like run for something like 2,000 consecutive days at this point.
That's
It's
cool.
just beautiful.
So you're on the call because you've got something
I've
branded
got
as
an
circling.
organization, yeah.
And up until this point, it hasn't been branded.
No.
It's just circling is something anybody can say they
Right.
do.
And authentic relating still is. Now, admittedly, there were a lot of people doing something they called circling that was very, very different. And something that people like kind of were talking about, but like didn't really talk about officially, is that Circling Europe style circling and relatefulness is
very different
so
from Jordan's.
different.
Yeah.
No, Circling Europe and relatefulness, I don't know how they are these days, but they're much more similar to each other than they are to integral style or
Really?
Guy Sangstock circling, which is much more structured and therapeutic, usually focused on an individual and their experience, much more guided by the facilitator. The facilitator is almost like a therapist. They're very hands-on.
That's where you get surrendered leadership versus, I guess, in the Guy Sandstock, it's not as surrendered leadership. It's
No. Surrendered,
very facilitated.
They're incredibly different practices. They should be called a different thing.
Really?
Yes, to me, at least.
But then the Europe branch continues being circling.
So this is one of the things, is like, I think that one of the reasons circling was getting so confused is you just had people that were trained in these different schools and you never really knew what you were going to get.
Yeah. And we would have people, when I did Jordan's thing for a long, long time, and you'd have people that would come from different practices and say, like, this isn't even circling. And we'd be like,
exactly.
well,
because it's so different,
yeah.
right? So it is still very confusing. But Guy's organization kind of used that as a reason to go, this thing needs more oversight, which maybe they weren't wrong about. The way they went about it was just like, talk to the other people that are already doing this practice before you decide to trademark it, because you have to enforce a trademark for it to be legal. Anyways, they formed this thing that they called the Circling Federation that was supposed to administer the trademark. They were supposed to hand over the trademark. When they got it to the Circling Federation, they got the trademark. They said, our lawyers told us not to hand it over. So anyways, from that, though, because there was a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen with circling, is it going to be regulated? Are we going to start getting letters that we have to cease and desist? Because of all that, a lot of the circling got renamed or became different. So Jordan renamed the Austin kind relatefulness, which I think was actually a good move. It was like, okay, I'm not even going to be involved in all this.
Well, you lose so much market presence, and like when you have a name that has that kind of lineage, and you're like, okay, now I'm relatefulness. Sure, Jordan has a name.
Yeah.
But you can't say circling and have it kind of means something. Now you have relatefulness and then authentic relating, and you have,
it's rough.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it's become lots of different things. But again, I think it was already so confused. It was almost like it couldn't get worse. What's amazing about it is that the practice has been powerful enough to continue despite all of those things. And authentic relating, even like what we call authentic relating, is like a ton of different games and practices. Some are taken from improv, some are from like IFS or NVC, some are like specific skill training for different communication skills. Some are just like, this sounds fun, let's put it in the book. Like, both of the practices are like, we were essentially like sitting in presence and practicing communication with each other and being with what's true and real, just like practices all over the world do. Yeah. So that's kind of the story of it. At some point, Jordan, a couple years ago, split from John and Sean.
Yeah. Circle Anywhere.
Circle Anywhere.
Circle Anywhere, and then had Circle Europe. Yeah.
And we went through, at Authentic Revolution, went through a whole bunch of changes to, tried to start a new branch for a while of relating languages that we thought could be a good bridge to mainstream culture. Didn't really work. Then started doing more with like conflict work, went back to the facilitation work we're doing. And have in some ways been really trying to find like what direction we go for a couple years, of like just asking the question, like, where are these skills most needed? in the world. And that's been a big
Where are these skills
process.
needed in the world? That's the question you're putting out there.
Yeah.
Where I can imagine it's where are they not needed? It seems like conflict skills,
Mm-hmm.
um, facilitation skills,
Yeah.
probably needed everywhere. It's just where do you have an appetite for them? Where are people really wanting them?
Right. Are they better to teach in companies and government and independent organizations
Probably
and
more
taught as
lucrative
those
in
skills?
companies.
Right. Well, that's part of the problem too, is like so many of our programs are um they just don't make much money because we want to make them pretty universally accessible.
Yeah,
We're working with people in different countries that have different exchange rates. The standard cost of living has risen and people's income has largely dropped. There's not as much, like,
yeah,
we're surviving on angel investing
yeah.
right now, and that is a big question of like how long can we do that? What do we focus on? Do we focus on making money, or do we focus on the things that seem most impactful to our students?
Mm.
It's a big question we're
It's
facing.
tightrope.
Yeah, exactly.